Hello and welcome to Capital Insight. I'm Representative Kevin Mannix and I'm your guest for this show, which is designed to give all of us a little more insight into what goes on in our government and some of the personalities who are involved in that process. Our guest today is a gentleman who has not been in state government all his life, but just for the last 8 years or so, who's been a representative from the Salem area, especially in West and South Salem, and is now a state senator. Gene Derfler from Salem.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kevin, for having me.
We're glad to have you on the show, and I've had you on before. We've talked a little about your background, but since we always have new viewers who may not know a lot about you, it helps people to develop a little insight into your personality and your background, to know sort of where you come from and where you've gone to school. Can you give us a little sketch of what it was like in your younger years?
Well, I was born in Portland. I remember when I was in the first grade, they asked me where I was born, and I told them I was born in Grandma's bedroom, which I was, as a matter of fact, in Portland. But I grew up in Southwest Washington, near Woodland, Washington. My folks had a farm, which was sort of common in those years of eking out a living on a farm. I grew up there, graduated from Woodland High School, and then I attended Bellingham, Western Washington College of Education for a short time before I went into the service. I went into the Navy in 1942 and served during that Second World War.
Now, during that process, you also met Thelma, who became your wife.
Yes, I met her while I was in the service back in Iowa. And you would wonder why somebody in the Navy would be back in Iowa, but it was a pre-flight school that was back there. And so we met. She was waiting on tables going to school, and we became good friends and eventually got married and have 3 kids.
Well, now, when you served in the Navy during World War II, as I recall, you were stationed in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Pensacola or somewhere?
Well, yes, I was stationed in Pensacola. I graduated from Pensacola, and then I took operational in Jacksonville, and then our squadron formed down in Miami. Mm-hmm.
Well, for the benefit of flyers and maybe old salts, what kind of equipment did you fly?
Well, I flew PBYs for a while, which was a seaplane, a 2-engine seaplane, and then eventually went into PB4Y2s, which was a single-tail B-24 that the Navy had for a patrol plane.
And after your military service, what did you do?
In '46, I went to work for Firestone as sort of temporary help through the Christmas time, but I ended up going into management for them, and I managed 3 different stores for them in the 6 years I was with them. I managed a store in Tillamook and one in Vancouver, Washington, and finally in Salem. That's how I ended up in Salem, managing the Firestone store here in Salem.
Well, while you were managing the Firestone stores, did you ever have this inkling that someday you'd be serving in the state legislature?
No, I never. You know, politics was the farthest thing from my mind. I wasn't involved in politics at all, and didn't really know what was going on, to be honest with you, in politics.
In the meantime, you were raising 3 kids.
I have 3 children, all doing very well. They're all grown and on their own.
And you and Thelma are still together.
52 years we've been married. Yeah.
Now, flowing from the Firestone operations, you also set up your own business. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Well, there was a store. There was 2 store managers, Ray Nichols and myself. Ray left Firestone a little bit before I did, and started the store called Nyco Furniture. As a matter of fact, when he started it, he was selling brake lining and transmission parts. But we decided to go into a furniture and appliance store, and I left Firestone sometime after that, and we worked together in the store for many years. We were partners for, I guess, 20 years, and Ray was a little bit older than I was and decided to get out, and I bought him out, and then we maintained the store for, I think, another 10 years after that.
And about when did you sell your interest in that?
Smith's bought it in 1982, so we've been out quite a while already now.
But on the other side of things, you've maintained sort of an entrepreneur sort of status in real estate and other business?
Yes, I've been selling commercial real estate for Coldwell Banker, and I also invested in a pizza parlor up in Portland, Clackamas, which has been very successful for us. And so we still stay in the business field quite a bit.
Well, let me take you to 1988 and maybe even 87 if you planned ahead, but you'd mentioned you had not really been all that interested in politics, but in 1988 you ran for the Oregon House of Representatives in the district next to the district that I ran in.
That's right. We ran together.
And so we ran into each other all the time on the campaign trail. You ran in the Republican primary, but I don't think you were opposed at that time, were you?
Yes, I was.
Oh, you were.
Vic Gilliam was my opposition at that time, the first time I ran.
So you got the Republican nomination and then won in November and served 3 terms in the House.
3 terms in the House.
And ran for the Senate. And you're in the middle of your first term in the Senate.
That's correct.
Now, during those 8 years of legislative service, do you have some perceptions that you've developed about what it feels like to be a legislator as compared to, say, a businessman and what those worlds are like?
You mean the differences between business and public service? Yeah, I think that I think the thing you learn in public service is you have to settle for less than what you want, and that things move extremely slow. And I think probably our forefathers probably designed it that way, but I always say that we can't do you much good, but we also can't do you much harm, because the process moves so slow, and as you know, and it's very frustrating that you want to get things done, and it you can't do them through the present process.
With those checks and balances, citizens sometimes overlook that. I mean, if you want to change something, you've got to get the House of Representatives majority to approve it, the Senate majority to approve it, and the governor to go along, and to get all those people to pay attention.
Not only that, but you have to get the bureaucracy to do it too.
That's the follow-up.
Yes.
That's the key, isn't it?
That's right.
Well, one of the issues that brought you into legislative activity was workers' compensation reform. You've been in the forefront of that. I still remember when you were on the House Labor Committee under Representative Shiprack was chair, the Democrats were in charge.
Yes.
You were in the minority. You were on that committee that I served on in my first term and yours. At that time, did you think that we would see the kind of revolutionary changes we've seen in, say, the workers' comp system?
Well, I certainly expected to, and I think that's how you get things done is through expectation. But I think that, as you know, our worker comp program in those years was a disaster. I had a very bad experience in the business I was in, having people get on the system and not being able to get them off, even though they weren't entitled to the benefits. And as you know, we worked on the interim on getting a bill written, and I think we were able to put enough pressure on the governor and the Democrats at that time to so that Goldschmidt had to do something, and he did form this committee called Mahonia Hall Group, which sort of used the bill we wrote as a roadmap through the system. And as you know, we were on a special committee in the 1990s when that was passed in a special session, and I don't think you know, we hear so many times about how bad things are, and at that time, if you remember, some of our opponents were saying, oh, you know, people are not going to be taken care of. It turned out, as you know, as to be an extremely good program for the people of the state of Oregon. We've increased the benefits to injured workers, and we've lowered the cost to employers, and that's a win-win. And I think that the system continues to go on. I think perhaps now we have the best workers' comp system in the United States. And as you know, last session, you and I worked for about 5 months rewriting that bill because of some of the court decisions that were made. And I think we have an extremely strong bill at this point, and it's an excellent program. We've reduced rates and added benefits. So.
Hasn't it been 7 years running now, the 7th year running, that we're going to see rate reductions?
7 years, and employers are paying something like 42% less now for workers' comp than they were 7 years ago. And the benefits that people who are injured have increased dramatically. So I think it's been a very good program.
Let me pause for a moment and mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, your host for the program, and our guest today is Senator Gene Derfler. After 8 years, I almost said Derfler.
Oh,
sorry about that.
I think called worse than that.
Well, we were just talking about workers' compensation reform, and I'm just using that as an example of follow-through, though. You were elected with that as a big issue.
That was the issue that I ran on, right, that we wanted to correct that.
And finally, in 1990, you saw some reforms, but then over the next few years, you saw that things were slacking because of some court decisions. So you and I went back in together, and we cleaned it up with some new legislation. Is that something that people need to watch for, is what I'll call the follow-through, the willingness to be dogged about not just getting an initial victory, but maintaining that beachhead?
I think so. You know, the things do change, and certainly the bureaucracy interprets things differently than what we thought we were accomplishing, and I felt, you know, very pleased that you and I were able to work together on that issue, and we did make a change, and I think it's really helpful.
Well, there's another area where you and I worked a bit, but I have to say you did the lion's share of the work, and this was the Jobs Plus program. That's what it's called now, with welfare reform at the forefront, and Oregon actually was in front of the rest of the nation in that area. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did in that area and what it was all about?
Well, I think if you remember, I think it was in 1993 when that bill was passed, that people had to work to get welfare, and that was, I think it was called workfare at that time. And when it came into the legislature, it was assigned to the Labor Committee that I was chairing at that time. And
didn't Governor Barbara Roberts say it was dead on arrival?
The governor said it was dead on arrival, and we had a 7-member Labor Committee, if you remember, and you were on that with us, and we brought that out of committee with a 7-0 vote, and we got it passed through the House. I think we only had 14 no votes. But it got stonewalled in the Senate. The Senate refused to hear it because the governor promised to veto it if it did pass. But we did come back the next session, and you and I again worked together on that, and we were able to get it through the House and the Senate again. You know, and it's been a dramatic change in the welfare programs in the state. We have gone from 44,000 people on welfare to 26,000, and we are saving about $100,000 a day in welfare payments.
I think that's a figure you might want to repeat. We are saving $100,000 a day. And that may boggle the mind of taxpayers, but that's the kind of situation that we were facing before in terms of the welfare system. But it was also a dead-end system. There was no strong mechanism for helping folks get out of that. Can you mention a couple of things that are in the process now that help end that dead-end process?
You mean how we got the bill through?
No, the things in the system that are different now, that work better.
Well, you know, people who have been on welfare for a long time, and there's a lot of people that don't want to be on welfare, but I think they're perhaps frightened a little bit, and they've not had the training. And so what we've done with the program, we've allowed them, and the best place to get training is on the job. I think all of us recognize that most of us learned the most when we all started out at menial jobs, but we were able to grow because of the learning process we got from the employers. And so this program allows a person to go to work for an employer. The employer has to provide a mentor for them, and the employer is paid back by the state at a minimum wage, and the employer can pay more, but the employee learns, and it makes himself a productive person. And if you talk to people who have gone through the system, they're very happy about it because now they're not dependent on the government. But we also added to that, we've also added that they continue to get child care and they continue to get their medical services. So many times we've heard where people go on a minimum wage job and it's better to go back on welfare because they don't make enough to pay those costs. And so this program was designed to make sure that the person continues to get medical and continues to get child care. And I think the average job now that we are putting those people into are like $6 an hour. And many of them are getting much more than that. So I think it's a great program.
So has Barbara Roberts called you up and said, I was wrong and you were right, Gene?
Well, she hasn't done that, but she did change the name of the program from Workfare to Jobs Plus so that the administration could take credit for it. So that's great. We don't care who gets credit for it. If it works, that's the main thing.
Well, are there some other issue areas that, well, in fact, I know there are, but I'm kind of giving you an open-ended question here. Other issue areas that have been of particular importance to you? I know that you've been engaged in reform on the employment relations laws for government employees and all of that. What are some of the things that you think have been highlights for you the last couple of years or the last 4 years or so?
Well, I think the things that we are going to be looking at, you're talking about perhaps next session.
Well, things that still need work, but you've also been involved in. Whatever you want to talk about in terms of issues.
Well, I think some of the, we still have a major problem in transportation. As we continue to grow, our population is growing at something like 2% a year, which is quite high compared to national figures. And we're getting more and more people into the system, into the state. Our road systems are not designed to take care of those. And so we're going to be looking at, how do we take care of those problems. I think that's going to be a big issue. Education is always big. We need to fund it, but we also have to in my opinion, make education more accountable. I believe that we have to make sure that the education system is turning out students that do have a future in the coming up things that are changing in the economy. I think that I think we have to measure the accountability more in education. I know that just giving more dollars is not always the answer.
Well, you are now the Senate Majority Leader-elect. I mean,
Right.
the majority, and really the Majority Leader, because the majority's already selected you as the
Correct.
person to be in charge. And Brady Adams is, in effect, going to be the Senate President. That, of course, requires an election, but the Republicans have said they're all going to vote for him, so they've selected him as their person, and there's 20 Republicans out of the 30 members of the Senate this coming session. Where do you see the legislature moving? Well, in terms of the development of issues and working with the governor, you've got a slight Republican edge in the House, 31 to 29, and you have a very heavy Republican edge, generally speaking, in the Senate, 20 to 10. And of course, the dynamics of partisan politics being what they are, that's supposed to be important, and people line up along those lines. And you've got a Democratic governor. How do you see the relationship developing this session, working with the governor?
Well, I would not think that it should be difficult. I think that in the process, I think we all want the same thing. Certainly, we want a better lifestyle for all Oregonians. But there's a difference in opinion on how to get there. And that, of course, comes from our lifestyles that we've had, our life experiences, perhaps formed directions that we think the government should go. And basically, I think Republicans have a tendency to think that people ought to be more responsible for themselves. And the Democrats seem to feel that they need to rely more on government for the help, to sort of bail them out or help them through the lives that we have. And that's sort of a difference in philosophy, I think, between the two parties. So there's always contentiousness in that, where you draw the line. But I think that the governor wants the same thing that we want, and I hope that we can reach an accord on where those lines are going to be drawn.
Do you see the party politics drawing people into more extreme positions? It always has amazed me how Republicans and Democrats end up sometimes being at each other's throats during the election process. And how does that carry over into the legislative process? Are the Republicans going to be working with the Democrats in the legislature?
I would say yes. That process has been going on for years, and I think there's a certain residual to that, perhaps early on in the session, but as we get through going into the session, there's less and less of it. Again, we do have to cooperate. We do have to work together. I think that our forefathers designed the system so it was contentious. And I think that when there is a budding like this and a lot of discussion, I think we end up with better laws. So I think people have to understand that the system was designed to do that, and sometimes I know from the outside it looks like it's very partisan, but I don't think overall that people lose from that. I think we gain from it because we end up with better laws.
Well, I mentioned that you're the Republican Majority Leader and you've been selected by your colleagues. How did you get there? What is that process all about? You just suddenly say, gee, I'd like to be the Majority Leader, or do you have to be working with candidates and raising money? I'm hinting at what I think is part of the process.
Sure. I think that a lot of it has to do with the ability to work with the other members. I certainly have a big advantage because I live in Salem. And trying to run the caucus from outside of the Salem area is a difficulty. I also have the advantage of not having to work for a living. I've done well in my business, and reached the age where I don't require a lot of money, and I'm doing fine with what I have. In other words, I'm taking in more than I'm spending, so I guess that's a good.
And you don't have to put in an 8-hour day somewhere else every day now.
Right. So I have the time, and I have the I think the ability to work with people. I certainly ran a business well, and yeah, I had 50 employees at that point, and I think this is not much different than that. It's you know, you have a lot of people with again different opinions that you try to blend to make something happen. So the fact that I was able to work on campaigns, I was working on 5 various campaigns during the Senate time, and we got 5 elected. Obviously, that helps you in getting that position. But I think the main advantage is the fact that I live in Salem and I can spend the time doing it.
Now, what do you think you'll do differently from, say, Brady Adams, who was the majority leader? Mm-hmm. Do you have some stylistic things that you've thought about where you're going to be different, or do you tend to emulate him, or is that just too personal a thing to be able to evaluate?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think everyone manages differently. Brady, of course, manages a bank. I'm sure that's a different type of employee than I had used to manage. But I would say the one thing that I saw lacking in his management style last time was communications. I think a lot of the legislators felt that decisions were being made without consultation with the balance of the caucus, and I think that's one area that I would like to see changed, that we have more open communication, more involvement with everyone.
I'm going to pause for a moment and mention to our audience for the last time before we wrap up that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host for the program. Our guest today is Senator Gene Derfler, the new Majority Leader of the Oregon Senate. We were talking about leadership styles and management styles, and I wonder, in terms of dealing with the Democratic caucus and in terms of dealing with the Republican caucus, if there's any particular strategies that you've agreed on in advance. I mean, in the House of Representatives, for a while, the Democrats, when they were in the minority, said, well, we'll have the rule of 14, that is, on major financial issues, 14 Democrats will hold back to make the Republicans carry the way. Sometimes the Republican caucus in the House was, I say this from the outside because I don't know, was accused of having an inside rule that somehow if a majority of that House Republican caucus didn't approve a bill, even if it had majority support over it all, it wouldn't get to the floor. Is there any such discussion going on in the Senate that you can talk about? Or?
Well, we haven't talked about anything like that. You know, obviously the majority does have the advantage in the makeup of the committees and who chairs them and who's on the committees. But I recognize that because you're Republican or Democrat, you don't really have all the answers, and I think that everyone has something to contribute. And hopefully we will allow the minority party to express their views, and we should be considering it because, like I say, I think it's when you get this contentiousness that you end up with better legislation. So I would expect that we'll continue to listen to their concerns and their ideas and hopefully incorporate some of them.
Do you see Oregon politics as moving towards more partisanship or less partisanship, meaning inter-party differences between the Democrats and Republicans?
I think it has to do perhaps more with the membership. I think that the makeup of our Senate this time will be, I think, better. I think that some of our members that are leaving perhaps added some to the partisanship, and we don't know quite yet what some of the members coming in, of course, but usually the new members don't do a lot of stirring the pot for a while, so we're hoping that we're able to get along and work well together.
Now, for the benefit of the audience, the power relationships are such that controlling the committees and controlling the process is a key to success, and the majority party then has control of all the levers of power. Mm-hmm. You mentioned committee chairs and committee members. Do you see any change in the selection process, such as are the Senate Democrats going to be offered the chance to name the Democratic members of the committees, or will it still be the President of the Senate who names all the committee members?
Well, the President of the Senate has the ultimate responsibility, and I've not been involved a lot with that with Brady. I've given him my suggestions, and I'm sure that Cliff, who is a minority leader,
That's Senator Cliff Trow?
Cliff Trow, I'm sure that he's also expressed his view where those, and usually they allow them to report back as to what committees they would like to have. And those are taken into consideration, so I'm sure that there will be some consideration given to that.
What are going to be the 3 worst issues that you have to deal with in the next session? I just made that up, but there must be some really challenging, difficult issues.
I think the issues don't change. The big issue that we're going to have again is education. How do you fund education adequately? And obviously, crime in prisons are another big issue that we're going to be addressing, and I think the third one I think is very important, of course, is the environment. That we're going to have to make sure that we, can get some sort of a balance between the environment and the needs for the economy.
Do you see the legislature taking a look at a modified bottle bill?
Yes, I think that that's something that we certainly should have the word on. I think we're going to have to address the bottle bill. If we don't, as you know, it's going to come back again in the form of an initiative. I think that we also have to look at the clean stream area. Again, these are concerns that people have about the ecology, and I think we're going to have to hopefully address those and answer them this next session.
Do you expect that the Republicans in the legislature may want to challenge the governor a little bit on prison siting, not as to the sites that are presently in process, but there's at least one additional prison that's in progress that the Emergency Board has not funded, so it won't have to go through the super siting process, but could go through a more political process. Has there been any discussion about what might happen with that, whether or not the legislature may say, by act of the legislature, which the governor, of course, has to sign off on, we're going to designate this 7th prison site and put in the law where it's going to be or anything like that?
I haven't heard anything discussed on that. I think, as I recall, we're going to be building 7 prisons, but I understand the 8th one is sort of off the chart right now because, as you suggested when you were working on some of these measures, that crime rates will be going down because, first of all, we're going to get some of those people off the street, and secondly, we're going to have some people exiting Oregon because crime doesn't pay any longer in Oregon. They know they're going to serve time. So I'm not sure that we're perhaps even going to need that 8th prison.
And I should have referred to it as an 8th site, not the 7th. We have the 7th and this is the 8th.
Yeah.
So I guess we can wait and see whether or not there's anything done further on that one.
See if you were right, that the crime rates are going to go down enough that we won't need that 8th prison.
Well, I will note that some spokespersons for government are now finally acknowledging when they speak to the media that maybe Measure 11 has something to do with the reduction in violent crime because the bad guys are off the streets.
Yes. I think it was very appropriate.
Now, in terms of the future, are you going to wait a while to see whether or not you run in 2 years, or you're healthy? Your wife Thelma helps you in this process. She's in good health.
Well, I think if one of the stipulations, I guess you'd say, when I took on the job as majority leader, that I would run again. So unless there's something happens that I don't know about, I probably will run again in 2 years.
Well, very good. Well, we are wrapping up now. We've just got a few seconds left. I'd like to thank you for being on the program.
I appreciate being asked.
And I'll mention to the audience that we'll probably have one more show running into December after this. So I won't give you a swan song yet, but I am getting ready to leave office in January. Thank you so much for joining us on Capital Insight today. Good luck to you in the next legislative session.
Thank you.
What is, and as a final shot, what is your prediction for the Super Bowl?
You know, it's interesting. I don't even know who plays in the Super Bowl. I'm not much of a sports fan.
Well, I don't have any predictions either, but I was just having a little fun. We ought to have more fun on this show.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining us. Bye-bye.